It was an ordinary morning at the United Earth Command Center. The planet rotated peacefully below, its oceans reflecting the sunlight, and for once, there was calm across the network of defense satellites and outposts that circled the world. Humanity had spent decades trying to earn a place among the stars. They had finally joined the Galactic Union, a council of countless alien civilizations that had existed long before humans ever built rockets. To the older species, humans were still new, still untested, still learning. They were respected for their spirit but not feared for their power. Most alien nations thought humans were brave but naive, too emotional to survive in the cold, endless politics of the galaxy. And yet, they were about to see a side of humanity no one had witnessed before. At first, it was just a faint pulse on the radar. A small repeating signal coming from deep space, weak and distorted. The communication officer thought it was interference, maybe an old probe sending back data. But when the technicians enhanced the frequency, everyone in the room froze. It was not random noise. It was an emergency transmission, a distress call, a series of short and long bursts, exactly like the ancient human SOS. The source was far away, beyond the edge of known human territory, from a small colony where both humans and alien settlers lived together. The message was fragmented, full of static, but what came through was chilling. There were screams, explosions, and a desperate voice crying for help before the signal was swallowed by silence. The control room filled with tension. Officers exchanged. Worried looks, engineers rushed to confirm the signal's origin, and analysts tried to decode the broken message. Soon, confirmation arrived. The colony of Epsilon Prime was under attack. It was one of the few human settlements that had worked side by side with alien partners, a symbol of unity and trust between species. And now it was burning. The attackers were identified as the Zelthar Dominion, a race known for their cruelty and hunger for destruction. They were not new to war. They had wiped out entire planets before, leaving nothing but ashes and fear. The news reached the Galactic Council almost instantly. Their reaction was cold and calculated. The larger civilizations issued statements of concern, but took no action. They called it a tragic incident, one that should be avoided, not confronted. Intervention will only escalate the conflict, they said. It is better to let the matter resolve itself. To them, Epsilon Prime was not worth the risk. It was too far, too small, and politically insignificant. Their fleet stayed docked, their leaders stayed silent. The galaxy, in all its wisdom and power, turned its back on a dying colony. On Earth, the response was very different. In the main, command hall. Silence filled the air after the message ended. Every officer, soldier, and technician had heard the last desperate words of the transmission. There was no mistaking it. People were dying, begging for help that might never come. General Arya Kessler, the commander of the United Earth Defense, stood motionless for a long moment. Her eyes were fixed on the hollow screen where the signal waveform still flickered weakly. Then she turned to her team and spoke firmly. "They called us for help," she said, "and we will answer." There was no applause, no shouting, just a quiet, collective understanding. Everyone in that room knew what her words meant. Sending help to Epsilon Prime was dangerous. The Zelthar were far more advanced, their fleet massive compared to Earth's. The journey alone would take days through hostile space. The Galactic Council had already warned that any military response could lead to galactic conflict. But humans had never been known for backing down when someone was in danger. From their earliest history, they had fought storms, wars, and impossible odds, not because they wanted to win, but because they refused to give up. Within hours, the command center came alive. Orders were shouted, communication lines opened, and alerts sent across all colonies. Earth was mobilizing. Every ship that could fly was being prepared. Warships, freighters, even old exploration cruisers. Engineers worked non-stop, upgrading shields and arming turrets. Pilots volunteered faster than the list could be processed. Mechanics skipped sleep. Families on Earth stood outside their homes, watching the sky as fleets of ships prepared for launch. The air buzzed with fear, pride, and determination all at once. Humanity was answering a call that everyone else had ignored. Meanwhile, the media began broadcasting the news. Images of the destroyed colony appeared across screens: burning buildings, wounded civilians, and broken settlements. People wept, not just for the humans there, but for the alien friends they had made. Across cities, people gathered in public squares, lighting candles for those trapped on Epsilon Prime. Some shouted for vengeance, others prayed for rescue. For the first time in years, Earth was united under one feeling: duty. The SOS had not just reached the command center, it had reached the heart of every human being. Back in space, debates erupted among the senior officers. Some argued that this was suicide. "We're not ready," one said. "We barely have the technology to fight them." Another added, "The Council will condemn us. We'll start a galactic war." But General Kessler only replied, "Then let them condemn us. I'd rather be condemned for trying to save lives than praised for doing nothing." Her words spread through the ranks like wildfire. Soldiers repeated them in mess halls. Technicians whispered them while working. And soon the phrase became the unspoken motto of the mission. As the fleet prepared to leave, the distress signal played one final time. The static was worse now, the voice weaker, but it still carried a message. "If anyone hears this, please help us." Those words echoed in every headset, every control room, every heart. It was no longer just an SOS from a distant planet. It was a cry that defined what it meant to be human. Outside the atmosphere, the vast fleet floated against the darkness of space. Dozens of ships aligned in formation, engines glowing blue, their hulls bearing the insignia of Earth. From orbit, they looked small compared to the infinite black around them, but within each ship, hundreds of hearts burned with resolve. The fleet's lead ship, the Spirit of Dawn, sent the final transmission back to Earth Command. "We are responding to the call." Down below, billions watched as the ships vanished into the stars. Mothers held their children, old veterans saluted, and scientists prayed their technology would hold. Nobody knew if the fleet would return. Nobody knew if Epsilon Prime could still be saved. But in that moment, Earth rediscovered something it had almost forgotten: unity. The SOS had done more than call for help. It had reminded humanity who they were. They were explorers, dreamers, and fighters. They were the species that refused to turn away when others suffered. They were the ones who believed that courage mattered more than caution. The galaxy might have ignored the cry, but humanity had listened, and that single choice would change everything. As the last of the ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, General Kessler stood alone in the observation deck, watching the empty space where they had been. She whispered softly, "May they make it in time." The stars shimmered quietly as if listening. Somewhere far away on a burning world, frightened voices still waited, not knowing that help was already on its way. The command center grew silent again, but it was no longer the same silence as before. Now it was heavy, alive with anticipation and fear. The officers resumed their duties. The technicians monitored long-range communications, and the Earth itself seemed to hold its breath. The signal that had once been a whisper of despair had become a promise that humanity would never stay silent when others were in pain. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was certain: the SOS had awakened something deep inside the human spirit. It was more than a message. It was a mirror reflecting what made humanity different from all other races. They were flawed, emotional and reckless, but they were also brave beyond reason. And in that bravery lay their greatest strength. As the stars continued to shine over Earth, the galaxy remained unaware that history had just taken a new turn. Humanity had made a choice that others had avoided for centuries. They had answered a call for help when no one else dared. And that single act of compassion and courage would soon force the entire galaxy to see humanity, not as weak newcomers, but as a force of heart and strength unlike any other. When the news of Earth's decision to send help spread through the galaxy, it created waves of shock and disbelief. In the grand halls of the Galactic Council, The alien leaders could not believe that humanity had dared to act without their approval. To them, the decision was foolish. They believed the humans were too inexperienced to face a threat like the Zelthar Dominion. The council gathered quickly, their holographic forms flickering above a vast circular chamber filled with the echoes of disagreement. Some species laughed at Earth's bravery, calling it ignorance. Others felt uneasy, sensing that something powerful stirred within the human spirit. But the majority agreed on one thing: the humans should stand down. The council sent a formal message to Earth. Do not interfere. You will only bring destruction upon yourselves and others. The message reached Earth Command while preparations were still underway. In the main conference room, the top officials of humanity gathered. Generals, diplomats, scientists, and representatives from the colonies all sat around a shining glass table. The air was thick with tension. The Galactic Council's warning was clear. If Earth launched its fleet, it would stand alone. No aid, no backup, no political protection. Some leaders hesitated. They remembered past wars, the fragile peace humanity had worked so hard to build. They feared losing everything. We cannot risk our entire species for one colony, one diplomat argued. We are still new here, still finding our place. Another added, if we go against the council, we might lose our membership. We'll become outcasts. But others in the room couldn't accept those words. They remembered the faces of the colonists, the sound of that desperate SOS. One young officer, barely out of training, stood up and said, if that was Earth calling for help, we would hope someone came. Why should we act any differently? His words struck the room like a spark. General Kessler looked at him and nodded slowly. He's right, she said. We joined the galaxy to build peace and unity. But peace means nothing if we let others die for it. Outside the political chambers, the people of Earth had already made their decision. The streets were alive with energy and purpose. Posters appeared overnight showing the colony's flag beside Earth's, with a simple message: we will not ignore the call. In factories and hangars, engineers continued to build. Scientists developed faster shields and stronger weapons. Even students volunteered to help, writing code, sending supplies, or recording messages of encouragement for the soldiers. It was no longer just a mission, it had become a movement. Humanity's collective heart was awake, and it was beating loudly. As the fleet neared readiness, a different kind of battle began, the debate of courage versus caution. Some within the government tried one last time to stop the launch. They presented reports showing the overwhelming strength of the Zelthar, charts filled with numbers and probabilities that all pointed to the same conclusion: defeat. It's suicide, one scientist whispered. We'll lose everything. But others disagreed. They argued that sometimes survival isn't only about winning, it's about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are impossible. Humanity's history was full of moments like that, when bravery was all they had left. And somehow, that was enough. In every major city, discussions filled the air. News programs brought in historians, soldiers, and philosophers to talk about the meaning of courage. Some said it was foolishness disguised as pride. Others said it was the very thing that made humanity special. A poet in New London wrote, "We are a fragile species, but our hearts are made of fire." The line went viral across the network, quoted by everyone from soldiers to schoolchildren. It became a message of hope, a symbol of human determination. As the Galactic Council continued to send warnings, the humans ignored them. They had made up their minds. The Council called their actions reckless, even dangerous. One alien ambassador, a tall, crystalline being named Vareth, arrived on Earth personally to plead with General Kessler. "You do not understand," he said in his soft, echoing voice. "The Zelthar are not just soldiers. They consume worlds. You will not survive." Kessler listened patiently, then replied, "Maybe not. But if we turn away now, we will lose something even more important than our lives, our humanity." Vareth stared at her in silence for a long moment. He saw no fear in her eyes, only conviction. When he left, he said quietly, "You humans are strange. You choose to fight when logic says run. Kessler simply answered, "That's what makes us human." Meanwhile, in the shipyards orbiting Mars and the Moon, thousands of men and women worked without rest. Sparks flew from welding torches, engines roared during tests, and the sound of hammering echoed across the metal corridors. Every person there felt the weight of what they were building. These weren't just ships. They were symbols of defiance, of loyalty, of unity. The Spirit of Dawn, Endeavor, Aurora, and dozens more ships were being fitted with weapons, shields, and the hopes of billions. Commanders trained new crews. Medics stocked supplies and engineers whispered prayers over engines before sealing them shut. Inside the barracks, soldiers prepared for what could be their final mission. Some recorded messages for loved ones, others stared silently at old photos. Yet despite the fear, there was pride in their eyes. They were part of something greater than themselves. One young pilot, barely 20, told his squadron, "They say we're not ready, maybe we're not, but those people out there don't have time to wait for us to be ready." His squad mates nodded. They weren't fighting for glory or politics. They were fighting because someone had asked for help. Back on Earth, the launch was announced to the public. The speech was simple and powerful. General Kessler appeared on every screen, her voice calm but firm. "We have been warned to stay silent," she said. "We have been told we are too small, too weak. But today we choose not to listen. Today we choose to be human." The world erupted in cheers. Across every continent, people stood in unity. It didn't matter where they were from or what they believed in. For once, they were one. As the countdown began, the Galactic Council sent one last transmission. "If you proceed, you will face the consequences alone." Earth Command replied with only 3 words. "We know. Launch." The fleet engines roared to life, glowing brighter than ever before. The sky shimmered with light as ships rose one by one, breaking through the atmosphere. People on the ground watched with tears in their eyes, waving flags and whispering prayers. Children pointed at the streaks of light cutting through the clouds, not knowing they were witnessing history. Inside the command ship, Kessler stood before her crew. She looked at their faces, young, determined, and ready. "We don't fight because we're strong," she told them. "We fight because someone needs us. Remember that." Her words echoed through the fleet's communication channels, reaching every ship, every soldier, every heart. As the fleet moved into deep space, the Galactic Council observed from afar, still unable to understand why the humans were doing this. To them, war was always about power, territory, and politics. But for humans, it was about something else entirely: connection. The idea that no cry for help should ever go unanswered. The galaxy had seen empires rise and fall, civilizations that ruled through fear or strength, but it had never seen a species fight so fiercely for compassion. Back on Earth, the news feeds showed the fleet fading into the darkness of space. Commentators spoke softly, their voices full of emotion. "They go not as conquerors," one said, "but as guardians." In every city, people gathered to watch the stars, waiting for updates, hoping against hope that their fleet would make it in time. The debate of courage had ended, not with words but with action. Humanity had chosen its path, one carved by empathy and bravery. The rest of the galaxy watched in silence, unsure whether to call it heroism or madness. But deep down, even the coldest alien heart felt a flicker of admiration. These humans, fragile and small, were willing to fight for strangers on a distant world. And as the human fleet continued its journey through the vast emptiness, one truth became clear. Courage wasn't about having power. It was about having the will to act when no one else would. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but that single choice, on that simple act of answering a cry for help, would change how they saw humanity forever. The journey began with silence. One by one, the human ships left the safety of Earth's orbit and disappeared into the endless dark. The fleet stretched like a trail of light across the stars. Hundreds of ships, each carrying people who had volunteered, knowing they might never come back. Inside every ship there was a strange mix of fear and pride. Some soldiers whispered prayers. Others stared at photos of family left behind. They all understood one thing clearly. They were humanity's answer to a cry for help, and failure was not an option. The engines hummed softly as the fleet moved into faster-than-light travel. Outside the viewports, the stars stretched into bright lines and space became a blur of color and light. Many of the younger crew members had never traveled so far before. To them, the galaxy felt endless and full of secrets. But to the older ones, the veterans, it was a reminder of how small humanity still was. They were traveling through territories controlled by alien civilizations far older and stronger than their own. And yet no one turned back. The thought of Epsilon Prime burning and broken pushed them forward. Days passed, though time felt strange in the emptiness of space. The fleet's communication systems were alive with chatter. Pilots traded jokes, engineers shared stories, and sometimes they played old Earth music to keep spirits high. Songs from different cultures filled the channels. Ancient war chants, love songs, lullabies, blending into something beautiful and human. It gave everyone strength. Even when exhaustion crept in, the music reminded them of home. The commanders held daily briefings, studying every bit of information they had about the enemy. The Zelthar Dominion was ruthless, their ships huge and deadly. Their weapons were far beyond anything humanity had faced before. The reports described how they destroyed colonies without warning, leaving no survivors. Every time someone read those reports aloud, the room fell quiet. Everyone knew what kind of enemy they were going to face. But instead of fear, it only made them more determined. "If the galaxy won't stop them," said one pilot, "then we will." As they crossed deeper into space, the fleet began to pick up fragments of communication, weak signals from the attacked colony. Static, broken voices, short transmissions that faded too quickly to understand. But each time they heard something, they pushed their engines harder. The colony was still fighting. People were still alive. They were running out of time. The journey wasn't easy. They had to pass through areas of space controlled by neutral species who didn't want to get involved. Some of these alien factions warned them to turn back, threatening to block their path. One even sent a small fleet to intercept them. The human commander, General Arya Kessler, contacted them directly. Her voice was calm but firm. "We are not here to fight you," she said. "We are answering a call for help. If you stop us, you will have to explain to your children why you let innocents die." There was a long pause before the alien ships moved aside. They didn't offer help, but they didn't interfere again. The galaxy was starting to see that humanity's courage wasn't a bluff. It was real. Inside the fleet, life continued in rhythm. Engineers worked around the clock, repairing minor system failures caused by long-distance travel. Medics checked on the crew, making sure stress didn't break them down. In the mess hall, soldiers sat together, sharing meals and stories. They spoke about home, about the people they loved, and about what they would do if they made it back. Some dreamed of returning as heroes. Others simply hoped they'd survive long enough to see the colony again. General Kessler moved from ship to ship, visiting crews, talking to them personally. She didn't make long speeches. She asked questions about their families, their reasons for joining, their fears. She listened. Her presence gave everyone hope. "Remember," she told them one night, "we are not fighting for glory. We are fighting so that no one has to feel alone in this galaxy." Those words were repeated through the fleet like a prayer. After weeks of travel, the stars around them began to change. They had entered the outer systems near Epsilon Prime. The signals coming from the colony were now clearer and more desperate. The planet was burning. Scanners showed wreckage floating in orbit, shattered satellites and broken defense ships. There were also hundreds of hostile signatures. The Zelthar fleet. Massive warships surrounded the colony, their energy signatures burning bright on every radar. A heavy silence fell across the human fleet. Everyone understood what this meant. The enemy was already there, and they were still attacking. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and had no reinforcements coming. General Kessler called a final meeting with her commanders. "We knew this would be hard," she said. "We knew we might not survive. But the people down there are still alive. If we turn back now, their deaths will be on us. If we fight, we might lose, but at least they'll know someone came." There was no hesitation. The decision was unanimous. They would fight. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the edge of the system. The view that met them was worse than anyone imagined. The colony planet glowed red and orange, covered in fires. The space around it was filled with debris, Broken ships, drifting bodies, shattered satellites. The Zelthar fleet moved like predators, their dark metal ships covered in jagged armor, firing beams of light that tore through what remained of the colony's defenses. In the command center of the Spirit of Dawn, everyone held their breath. The enemy ships hadn't noticed them yet. For a moment, the fleet floated in silence like ghosts in the dark. The commander looked at Kessler and asked, "Do we announce ourselves?" She shook her head. "No, we attack." There were no speeches, no countdowns, no heroic music. Just a single order. All ships engage. The human fleet roared to life. Engines flared, weapons charged, and in seconds the dark sky lit up with streaks of blue and red fire. The first wave of missiles hit the Zelthar ships before they could react, ripping through their outer shields. The humans moved fast, using hit-and-run tactics, darting between enemy lines. They were smaller and weaker, but faster and smarter. The Zelthar, used to easy victories, were caught off guard. Pilots screamed commands into their headsets, dodging plasma beams and launching counterattacks. A squadron of fighters flew straight into a massive Zelthar cruiser, targeting its engines and weak points. The explosion lit up space like a miniature sun. Cheers erupted across the comms, and short-lived but powerful. The humans had drawn blood. The battle grew more intense. Enemy reinforcements poured in and human ships began to fall. The Valiant, one of the first ships to launch, was hit by 3 enemy beams. Instead of retreating, its captain rammed the ship into the nearest enemy destroyer, destroying both in a blinding explosion. "For Epsilon Prime," were his last words before the transmission cut off. His sacrifice gave other ships enough time to regroup and strike back. Down on the planet, colonists watched the battle unfold through the smoke-filled sky. For weeks they had felt abandoned, sure that no one was coming. But now, through the burning clouds, they saw flashes of light and realized someone had come. Humanity had arrived. People cried, shouted, and prayed, not believing their eyes. For the first time since the attack began, hope returned. Back in orbit, the fight raged on. The Zelthar tried to surround the human fleet, but the humans kept breaking through their formations, moving unpredictably. They used creativity and instinct, things the enemy didn't understand. Every time a ship was lost, others moved in to cover it. Every time the Zelthar thought they had won, humans found another way to fight back. General Kessler stood at the center of the command deck, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. Reports came in constantly, losses, victories, damage. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed calm. "Hold the line," she repeated again and again. "We didn't come this far to stop now." Hours turned into days. The battle was no longer just about saving the colony. It had become a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity was showing what courage really looked like. Not fearlessness, but the strength to fight even when you're afraid. By the time the Zelthar realized the humans would not retreat, it was too late. Their fleet had suffered heavy losses. The humans, though wounded and weary, still fought with everything they had. They didn't fight like soldiers trained by rules. They fought like survivors who refused to die quietly. When the final wave of Zelthar ships retreated into the dark, the human fleet was battered and broken. But they were still there. The colony still stood, and the stars, once silent, now carried the echoes of a battle that would never be forgotten. Humanity had crossed the galaxy to answer a single SOS, and in doing so, they had proven something the universe had long ignored. That courage was not about strength or technology, but about the heart that refuses to give up, no matter the cost. The first moments of the battle were filled with fire and chaos. The silence of space was shattered by explosions that burned brighter than the stars themselves. Human ships darted through the darkness like sparks from a flame, fast and determined. They had no element of surprise anymore. The Zelthar had realized who they were fighting. The enemy's massive ships turned, their black hulls glinting with deadly light, and opened fire. The battlefield became a storm of energy beams, missiles, and burning wreckage. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with a kind of fury that no machine could measure. The Zelthar were known throughout the galaxy for their discipline and precision. They fought like machines, following commands with perfect accuracy. But humans, they were different. They fought with emotion, with instinct. Their movements were unpredictable, their decisions wild but brilliant. Where logic said retreat, they charged. Where tactics said wait, they struck. The enemy could not understand it. For every ship the humans lost, they destroyed 2 of the enemies. For every explosion that tore a human vessel apart, another ship appeared to take its place, firing with even greater rage. On the bridge of the Spirit of Dawn, General Aria Kessler stood at the command console, watching the chaos unfold. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were sharp. "Target their power cores," she ordered. "Make every shot count." Around her, officers moved quickly, shouting coordinates, tracking ships, and sending commands across the fleet. The enemy ships were massive, but they had weak points, small, hidden vulnerabilities that only human creativity could exploit. The engineers had studied the Zelthar design for months before the battle, and now that knowledge was saving lives. Down in the hangar bays, fighter pilots climbed into their small, fast crafts. The noise was deafening, engines roaring, alarms blaring, voices shouting orders. Among them was Lieutenant Ryan Holt, a young pilot from Earth who had joined the mission with no expectation of coming home. His hand shook as he closed the cockpit, but his eyes were steady. "This is for Epsilon Prime," he whispered. When the launch doors opened, he and his squadron shot into space like arrows. They weaved between enemy fire, dodging blasts that could have turned them into dust. Their mission was simple but deadly: disable the enemy's shields from close range. As the fighters flew through the battlefield, enemy cannons turned toward them. Explosions surrounded them, lighting up the blackness like 1,000 suns. One by one, some of the fighters were destroyed, their pilots vanishing in flashes of light. But those who survived pushed forward. Holt's ship took heavy damage, alarms screaming inside his cockpit, but he didn't turn back. He flew straight into the enemy's largest cruiser and fired all his remaining missiles. The explosion ripped the ship in half, sending debris flying in every direction. Holt's ship was destroyed in the blast, but his sacrifice opened the way for others. In the command center, Kessler saw the explosion and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Another brave soul gone. She didn't allow herself to grieve, not yet. "They did their job," she said quietly. "Push through the gap." The fleet advanced, focusing all firepower on the now exposed enemy formation. The Zelthar fleet began to falter. Their once perfect lines broke apart as human ships charged through, firing continuously. It wasn't strategy anymore, it was survival. Every human ship fought like it had nothing to lose. Meanwhile, down on Epsilon Prime, the colonists watched the sky burn. They could see the battle even from the ground. Flashes of light cutting through the smoke-filled clouds. Every explosion made the ground tremble. Civilians hid in underground shelters, listening to the faint rumble of war above. The communication systems had been damaged for days, but finally a signal came through. A human voice. "This is the United Earth Fleet, hold on. Help has arrived," the colonists cried. Some fell to their knees in relief, others hugged each other. For so long they had believed no one was coming. Now they knew they were not alone. Back in orbit, the fight reached its peak. The Zelthar released their most powerful weapon, a massive energy cannon capable of destroying an entire ship in one shot. It glowed red, charging for fire. Kessler saw it on the radar. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," she shouted. The cannon fired, hitting the Valor, one of the largest human battleships. The explosion was blinding. The Valor shattered instantly, breaking into hundreds of burning fragments. For a moment, despair spread through the human fleet. But then, from the wreckage, smaller ships emerged. The escape crafts and gunboats that had launched seconds before destruction. They immediately rejoined the fight, firing at the enemy. Even in death, the Valor had protected them. Seeing this, Kessler clenched her fists. "That's what it means to be human," she whispered. "We fight until we can't anymore, and then we fight some more." Her words were broadcast across the fleet, giving new life to exhausted crews. They fought harder, their ships glowing red from overheating engines, but no one cared. The battlefield was filled with courage and chaos, with screams, static, and fire. On board the medical ship Mercy Star, doctors and nurses worked non-stop. They treated burns, radiation wounds, and shrapnel injuries. The halls were filled with smoke and the cries of the wounded. But even as the ship shook from enemy fire, no one left their post. One nurse, her hands trembling, looked out of the small window and whispered, "Come on, we're counting on you." Outside, a group of human ships formed a defensive wall around the medical vessel, protecting it from incoming fire. One by one, those ships were hit, but none moved away. After hours of brutal combat, the human fleet began to gain ground. The Zelthar had underestimated their enemy. The humans used every trick they had: decoy drones, hacked enemy signals, and even suicide maneuvers. One ship, the Horizon, deliberately overloaded its engine and rammed into the enemy flagship, destroying both in a massive explosion that shook the entire system. The shockwave knocked out communications for minutes, and when the screens came back online, everyone saw it. The Zelthar ships were retreating. At first, no one believed it. The enemy that had crushed countless civilizations was turning back. The humans didn't cheer right away. They waited cautious, their weapons still aimed. But slowly the radar confirmed it. The Zelthar were leaving. One by one, their ships vanished into the void. A silence fell over the fleet, broken only by the soft crackle of damaged radios. And then at last the cheering began. Some laughed, others cried, and a few just sat in silence, unable to believe what they had done. General Kessler slumped back in her chair, exhausted. Her uniform was torn, her face covered in sweat and ash. "Is it over?" one officer asked. She looked at the burning wreckage outside and said softly, "For now." Around them, hundreds of ships floated in ruin, both human and alien. But amid the destruction there was victory. The colony below was still alive. Against every prediction, every warning, humanity had done the impossible. The radio crackled again, this time with a faint voice from the surface. "This is Epsilon Prime, we see you." "Thank you." The bridge went silent again, but this time it was a silence full of pride and emotion. Kessler smiled weakly. "We heard the call," she said. "And we answered." As rescue operations began, the fleet descended toward the planet. Fires burned across the surface, and the once beautiful cities were now ruins. But survivors emerged from shelters, waving at the ships descending from the sky. Soldiers and medics landed to help, giving food, water, and medical aid. The colonists looked at them like saviors. Many could not believe that humanity had crossed the stars just to save them. When night fell on Epsilon Prime, the sky glowed with the remains of the battle. Broken ships drifted like ghosts among the stars. The soldiers gathered outside, exhausted, staring up at the sky. No one spoke for a long time. They all knew how many had been lost. Thousands of brave souls who would never return home. But in their silence there was pride. They had proven that courage was more powerful than fear, that heart could defeat even the strongest enemy. General Kessler stood on a hill, watching as the survivors reunited. Children ran to their parents, people hugged, and laughter mixed with tears. One of her officers walked up beside her and said quietly, "We did it." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the sky, where faint trails of smoke still lingered. "Yes," she finally said, "but the galaxy will never be the same after this." And she was right. The battle for Epsilon Prime was not just a victory for one world. It was a message to every world. Humanity had shown the galaxy that even a young, small race could stand against impossible odds if they fought for what was right. The Zelthar had seen it. The Galactic Council had seen it. And every civilization in the stars would remember the day the humans rose from their homeworld and fought not for conquest, not for power, but for compassion. In the cold emptiness of space, among the wreckage and the silent stars, the memory of that battle burned brighter than any sun, a reminder that sometimes the strongest weapon in the universe is the courage of a heart that refuses to give up. The days after the battle were filled with silence, the kind that comes after something too big to understand. The space above Epsilon Prime was still filled with the wreckage of war. Broken ships drifting like ghosts, fires still burning across the surface, and the smell of smoke mixed with metal. But inside that silence was something powerful. The feeling of victory, of survival. Humanity had done what no one believed possible. They had stood against the Zelthar and won. The news spread like wildfire across the galaxy, carried by signals, witnesses, and trembling voices. Entire worlds stopped to listen. For the first time, the name humanity was spoken not with doubt or pity, but with awe and respect. General Arya Kessler stood on the deck of the Spirit of Dawn, now half damaged, but still holding strong. Around her, the crew worked to restore systems and tend to the wounded. The once busy bridge was quieter now, filled with tired but proud faces. "We'll begin recovery operations tomorrow," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but her heart was heavy. So many lives had been lost. Each victory had come with a terrible price. Yet as she looked at the screens showing the surviving colonists being rescued below, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. On the surface of Epsilon Prime, the world was in ruins, but it was alive. Soldiers and colonists worked side by side to rebuild what had been destroyed. Makeshift camps were set up for survivors, and medics worked without rest to help the injured. Children who had hidden in fear for weeks were now running freely in the open air again. Everywhere, people spoke the same words. They came for us. The humans came. To the colonists, those words meant everything. They had seen death, despair, and fear, but they had also seen humanity's courage. In orbit, engineers and scientists from the fleet studied the wreckage of the Zelthar ships. The technology was unlike anything they had seen before. "They're far more advanced than we imagined," one scientist said, staring at a glowing fragment of alien metal. "But they bleed. They can be beaten." That realization spread through the human fleet like a spark. For decades, humans had seen themselves as the smallest voice in a galaxy full of powerful civilizations. But now they knew. Power was not everything. Determination, unity, and heart could win even against the strongest enemy. Messages started, arriving from other planets, from distant outposts, and even from members of the Galactic Council who had once looked down on humanity. Some were words of praise, others were cautious questions. "We did not know you were capable of such force," one message read from the Ardanian Republic. Another simply said, "Perhaps we were wrong about you." The humans didn't respond right away. They were too busy saving lives and counting their dead. Respect from others was good, but it could never bring back those who had fallen. Among the soldiers, stories began to spread. Stories of bravery, of last stands, of moments that no one would ever forget. They talked about Lieutenant Ryan Holt, the pilot who had flown straight into an enemy ship to save his comrades. They talked about the Valor, the ship that had sacrificed itself to protect the fleet. They talked about medics who worked while their ships were burning, and engineers who repaired engines with their bare hands while under fire. These stories became the soul of the victory. Proof that heroes were not born. They were made in the moments when everything seemed lost. In one of the medical camps, a young nurse named Liana sat beside a wounded soldier who had lost both his legs in the battle. "We did it," she whispered to him, forcing a small smile. The soldier looked up, his eyes tired but shining. "Did we really win?" he asked weakly. Liana nodded. "We did." They ran. For a long moment, the man just stared at the ceiling, his lips trembling. Then he laughed softly through his pain. Then it was worth it. That simple sentence captured the spirit of everyone who had fought. They had lost much, but they had gained something priceless, the knowledge that they could fight for what was right and win. When the Galactic Council held an emergency meeting to discuss what had happened, every seat was filled. Representatives from dozens of species argued and debated, their voices echoing across the great chamber. The name Earth was mentioned again and again. Some spoke with fear. "They are dangerous now," one alien said. "If they could defeat the Zelthar, what else can they do?" Others spoke with admiration. "They did what none of us dared to do," another said. "They saved lives when we turned away." The Council, once dismissive of humanity, now faced a new reality. Humans were no longer weak outsiders. They were a power that could not be ignored. Back on Earth, the news of victory reached every city, every home. Streets filled with people holding flags and candles. They cheered for the soldiers, for the scientists, for the engineers, for everyone who had made the impossible happen. Families who had lost loved ones stood together, crying and smiling at the same time. The images of the battle were broadcast everywhere. The moment the Zelthar retreated, the wreckage of the Valor, the survivors waving from Epsilon Prime. Humanity had found a new kind of pride, one born not from conquest but from unity and courage. General Kessler returned to Earth months later. The moment she stepped out of her ship, crowds cheered, but she didn't smile. Her heart was still heavy with the memory of those who didn't come home. Reporters surrounded her, asking questions about the battle, about what humanity would do next. "We did what we had to do," she said simply. "We answered a call for help. That's all." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The galaxy had seen something new that day, a species that refused to stay silent, that stood up not for power but for justice. In time, the Galactic Council officially recognized humanity as a defender species, a rare title given to those who fought to protect life beyond their own world. For the first time, human representatives were invited to the High Council, not as observers, but as equals. When Kessler stood before that vast gathering of alien leaders, she felt the weight of every life lost in the battle. She didn't give a long speech. She simply said, "We don't seek war, but when we hear a cry for help, we answer it. That is who we are." The hall fell silent. Even those who had once mocked humanity now lowered their heads in respect. Years later, Epsilon Prime became a symbol of hope across the stars. Its cities were rebuilt, stronger than before. Monuments were raised in memory of those who had fallen, not just humans, but also alien allies who had joined the fight at the last minute. Travelers from every corner of the galaxy visited the memorial that stood at the center of the rebuilt capital. It was a simple statue of a human hand reaching out to lift another hand, a reminder of the moment when compassion became stronger than fear. Among the wreckage left in orbit, the spirit of dawn was restored and placed in a museum on Earth. Children would visit and touch the metal walls that had once faced the fires of war. They would listen to recordings of the final battle, hearing the voices of pilots, commanders, and soldiers who refused to give up. Teachers would tell them, "This is what it means to be human, to stand up even when you're afraid, to help even when you might fall." And every generation after would grow up with that lesson written deep in their hearts. For the galaxy, the Battle of Epsilon Prime became more than a victory. It became a turning point. Civilizations that had once stayed divided began to cooperate. Treaties were signed, peace talks began, and alliances formed. Humanity's courage had sparked something larger, a sense that unity could stand against darkness. Even the Zelthar, who had retreated into the unknown, never attacked again. Some said they feared humanity's strength. Others believed they respected it. Whatever the truth was, one thing became certain: the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. In her later years, General Arya Kessler retired to a quiet home by the sea. Sometimes she would sit on her porch at night and look up at the stars, remembering the day she saw them burning with fire and war. She often thought about the people she had lost: Holt, the pilots, the soldiers who never came home. But she also thought about the lives they had saved, the worlds that now lived in peace because of that one battle. One evening, a reporter came to interview her, asking what she thought the legacy of that war was. She smiled faintly and said, "The legacy isn't mine. It belongs to all of us. It belongs to every human who believes that when someone cries for help, we don't turn away." As the stars reflected in her eyes, she whispered softly, "That's the day humanity truly grew up. Not when we learned to fight, but when we learned why." And somewhere out in the deep, endless dark of space, the echoes of that SOS, the call that started it all, still drifted across the stars. But now it was not a cry for help. It was a song of remembrance, a story of courage, and a reminder to every world that when humanity hears the call, the galaxy listens and respects.